Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our very first virtual author event. We really appreciate you being here. It's been about a year now since we had our last Pasco lecture, which seems like a long time ago. But today we are trying to continue the tradition using a virtual system. And we want to thank the Church on the Cape for their assistance in this production, along with Mike Kelly, who's behind the scenes. He didn't want me to mention his name, but I did. And I am Kristen Kuehnle. I'm the owner of Fine Print Booksellers in town. If you haven't found me yet, we hope you will. And today we are interviewing Didi Cooper. And Didi Cooper is the author of The Magic of Missing You. And I have to say, this is a good book for book groups. This is a lot of interesting discussion that will come out of reading this book. So for that reason, I highly recommend it. Thank you, Didi, for joining us so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
What I wanted to ask you first was about yourself, because I know you live in Cape Porpoise, I think.
Yes.
And you have a connection with Kennebunkport, Maine. How did that come about? How long have you been here? How's that influenced your writing? What brings you here?
Sure. So about 12 years ago, my husband and I started to take weekends up here, vacation a little bit, sort of to get away from it all in Connecticut. So we would drive back and forth from Connecticut to Maine. And I don't know, maybe 5 years into our repeated visits, we were sitting at Allison's at the bar one night, and I said to him, I'm going to be a little crazy, but we should buy a house here. You know, we thought about our future. We thought about that this was just a place that we were so drawn to. We felt we belonged here. So we started to look at houses, and about the following year, we found the perfect house for us, an old girl. She needs some love, and she's 1855, Cape Porpoise. We love it, and we still go back and forth to Connecticut, but we spend most of our time here. So that's sort of how we were drawn in.
Okay, thank you. When did you know you wanted or you could write a story?
Not that long ago, actually. Most of the writing that I have done in my past has been academic writing. So, and I've always found that sort of a requirement of my work, and very dry. It wasn't my favorite thing to do. So after I finished all my graduate work, I got my doctorate, wrote a dissertation, was exhausted and needed a hobby, but I didn't think it would be writing because I was just sort of burnt out from academic writing. And then I had this idea that I would write this little magical story that would take place in Kennebunkport, our favorite place to be. And I was going to write a short story and submit it. I thought that might be fun. It would give me a little bit of a hobby. And the short story turned into a full-length book. It took me about a year to write, a year to have it edited. That is not, that version of the book that you all are reading is not the first version of the book. It's been rewritten a few times.
Interesting. So it really was late in life that you knew you had a story to tell.
Yes.
You've also written a children's book.
I have. So while that book was being edited, so they tell you if you want to keep pace as a writer to just keep, start your next book. Just don't wait for that one. Just start your next book. I had a hard time doing that. I didn't know what I wanted to write. I didn't know if I wanted a sequel to that book, because what if no one liked that book and now I had 2 books that nobody wanted? So I was really stuck. And my daughter-in-law and my son were expecting their first baby. She was about, I think, 5 months pregnant. And it just kind of hit me. The idea for our children's book hit me. And I wrote it specifically for him, our first grandson. And I published that through Maine Authors Publishing in Thomaston. Yeah, so that just sort of came out of me quickly. That was not quick.
Okay. Yeah, this is The Magic of Missing You. Can I ask, I've had some discussions with Mary Lou about when you might have come up with the title. And we think it's at 2 different points in time. Can you tell us a little bit about the title? And
Sure.
Did it drive the book, or did the book drive?
The title drove the book.
Okay.
The title came first. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, I guess. There was my grandfather who passed away when I was about 20 years old. He passed away on Christmas Eve, so it's something you just don't forget. I didn't find out until later in like my teens that he had been married before he met my grandmother. And they had both been married before. My grandmother and my grandfather, now they're both had passed away. And back then, I guess it must have been like the early 30s, 1930s. Divorce was not something you talked about. And especially Italian Catholics, it was like the whole situation was just buried. It was a short marriage for him, a short marriage for her, and no one was allowed to talk about it, apparently. But I found out just a few years before I wrote that book that the woman that my grandfather was married to passed away on the exact same night on Christmas Eve. And
As your grandfather.
As my grandfather. And right before midnight, the whole thing. So I asked my dad if we could pry a little bit. He said, absolutely not. It didn't happen. And I just kind of had this feeling like I over-romanticized it probably, that what if they were meant to be together? What if they had always missed one another? And then that was the idea for the story, that there would be this magical element to it. And what if they were two people that had lived separate lives, but were always meant to be together, and they would both die at the end, which doesn't happen, so I'm not spoiling anything, because when I was writing, initially that was going to be the ending. And then I thought, well, that's too crazy, no one would believe it. But that's how the title drove the story.
Very, very interesting. The book you write in 3 different time periods. How difficult was that? I mean, I would almost think I'd have to write each story separately and then weave them together, but that doesn't make sense.
I wrote alternating. And
let's go back. It's 1990.
1990, and then like 2016.
2016,
right.
2017.
And it spans about a year.
Right.
Of 2016 to 2017, and then the rest are flashbacks. And then the other time period that you speak of is the prologue, which is when the main character, Jack, is actually a young boy.
And Jack it sounds like he might be your grandfather.
I tried to weave a little bit of my grandfather into that character. My grandfather was a man of few words. And, he was a little bit quiet, a little bit shy. You never knew quite what he was thinking, but he was very warm, and we spent a lot of time with him. So, yes. And then I wove, other people that I know into that character. And my husband loves to paint and take pictures, and he's, sort of an artist. And so you kind of just grab things that have happened to you in your past. And, never having written a story before, I probably used too much of that. But that's what I drew upon never writing fiction before.
How did you come up with Jack as a child? Because that was all imagination then, from what you thought your grandfather had experienced growing up, or hypothetically?
Hypothetically. So the first version of the book was written in first person, alternating between Lizzie and Megan. And a very generous New York City agent requested a full manuscript and then ultimately turned it down, but she was nice enough to give me this laundry list of things that she thought that could improve the book. And I took it very seriously.
Very interesting. That's excellent feedback.
And I knew that she knows best. It hurt a little to think that this story was finished. It was nowhere near finished. So I thought that if I wrote it in third person, I could tell a little bit more of Jack's background. I could tell a little bit more of the grandfather's, Jack's father's story. And it worked out, and she ended up being right. Mm-hmm. So the prologue came much later. I was finished with the second version of the book. I don't want to say second draft. There was probably 40 drafts, but I wrote that at the last piece, and I thought it would be nice to kind of put a little bit of a background on Jack and how he might have gotten his magic, or maybe how he no longer had it anymore, and why he could not be sort of interacting with the magic. And that's why I put the prologue in.
Okay. Well, it's a very, very interesting story with different characters. I wonder do you identify with one in particular, or in some ways with all of them?
All of them. I feel like all of them. There's lots of me and Lizzie. There's lots of me and Megan. Mela was initially going to be this villain, and she was going to be the one that, kind of made all of this chaos happen, and that she was sort of behind the scenes sabotaging everything. And as I started to write it, I just felt, as the story came about, I just started to feel more for Mela. And I thought, well, families, relationships, it's not black or white. There's not a villain. There's not a good guy. There's not a bad guy. We all kind of trample over each other's boundaries. We kind of try to do our best, and sometimes we go our separate ways. So I wanted it to be multi-layered in the idea that you could maybe root for one character at one point in the story and then root for another, because it's just kind of what real life is like.
That's right. It was. I read the book. I did have some favorites along the way, and I wondered I could identify with this character, and I don't want to say more, but it's very, very interesting, the shifting characters.
And I've had a lot of people say to me that they identified with a certain character, that they've identified with Lizzie and something like that happened in their past, or that they identified with Mela and the difficulties that she had, even though they're not expanded upon, it's certainly there's touching issues that people can relate to.
How did you write the part about, there are two areas, visiting a psychic? How did you come up with that experience? Because it kind of occurs, one sounds plausible as some of the, let me have you answer about visiting a psychic.
So I have visited psychics before in my past, not most recently, not in the past, years, but I was able to draw on those sort of experiences and to feel what it was like to be nervous, but to look at it as entertainment, yet to think, is this real? And that is how that came to be. So I did have a little bit of experience.
Did it help that there was one in Kennebunkport?
It did, because it's so perfect, right? It's perfect.
Yes.
As many places that I could mention in Kennebunkport that I've either been to or felt a part of, or there's a scene when Megan walks out onto the sidewalk, and things are quiet, and she just pictures Dock Square, and that's just such an easy thing to do when you live here and love here. And even those visitors that contact me on Instagram, and they love it just as much as the locals. And it's such a nice, it's a bubble. It's a community that is almost magic. It is almost enchanted here. And I wanted that to come across, because I think a lot of us feel that way.
Very interesting, because you do portray Dock Square quite well.
Thank you.
I really like the description of it, and the magical part with the snow coming down and everything. I could visualize a lot of the events, so it's nice to see. How it's like you are able to describe an out-of-body experience. How could you come up with researching something like that? I don't want you to give it away or anything like that, but how do you...
I think it's partially fantastical, right? It's just the idea of being outside of yourself, or this idea of not knowing what the afterlife is like. We all think we might know, but in reality we don't, and we have these ideas about what it might look like or what it might feel like. So really that's just it. I try to create, the book is very much set in the here and now. I didn't want to build a fantasy world, but I also wanted to build enough magic that you can like walk through the streets and wonder what's real and what's not.
It's really interesting how you've portrayed all the local places in Dock Square. Did you go visit each one separately to make sure?
Well, I had been to them over the years.
Okay.
Yeah, so like, there is a scene outside of Mornings in Paris that I think any of us could relate to, the feeling of sitting
yes.
outside in the fall and the crowds have gone. The people that were here for the summer have left. And it's just that like inhale, you can smell low tide comes and you can smell that fresh air coming in, and you just love the idea of being able to relax into yourself. So it was kind of easy because I've spent so much time here.
Which really helped.
Yeah,
a lot, yes.
I didn't really have to visit or do any particular research because I had been doing it for years.
How about the private school?
So I had worked in a private school at one point during my career. It was nothing like the school that is portrayed there, and that's purposeful. I didn't want to. So in my past and somewhat still, I work in special education.
Okay.
And I was very deliberate before I started writing that I would never write about special education. I would never write a character with special needs or a school with special needs. It's just so close to me and such part of my professional identity that I wanted to make sure there was nothing that related to the special education community or that could be perceived that way. That's just kind of like my own private and professional place, so I will never use that as a setting or for characters.
Okay. What would you like people to take away from The Magic of Missing You?
I think just the idea that relationships are complicated, being a human being is difficult, and there are people that you love in your past that were just part of your journey, right? You thought you were going to be with that person, but you really weren't meant to be with that person, right? I think we all have had that happen. And then mother-daughter relationships and father-daughter relationships, just that they're not always easy. And I mean, even from experience, I have 2 grown adult boys with wives and babies. And it's just, relationships are hard,
Yes.
we're always navigating them and we're always wondering what if, and we're always trying to be our best. So I just think to feel for the characters and to kind of dive in and make your own, I guess, judgments about how they interact with one another.
Is there anything you're working on now or
So not related to this book.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a standalone,
Okay.
one and done kind of book. I tried a little bit to kind of come up with a sequel, and it didn't feel natural to me. And I felt the way the book ended, without not giving anything away, I felt the way the book ended tied up enough.
Closure.
Gave the characters closure. And the ending was new too, that my brother had suggested some plot twists and my brother was helpful in getting everything tied together at the end. My brother and my husband were and my sister-in-law were excellent at helping me find a plot hole and fix it. And so it was a fun project to work on, but that story is over.
Is there any other area you're looking into writing?
So right now I have 2 manuscripts started. I have a fiction novel that will partially take place here, but it's very different.
Okay.
It's sort of a little bit like a Sleeping with the Enemy remake. So it's very different. And then I have a nonfiction project called Create Happy, which is just about, it's a nonfiction journey through my eyes, through coming off of a crazy, hectic lifestyle, needing to retreat somewhere sometimes. And part of the reason I write with a pen name is I just felt like it was a fun way to detach myself from my profession and to give myself a little bit of a retreat. So that book is actually being shopped to agents right now. I have a book proposal and that's going out to agents, and we'll see what happens. But I will self-publish it if need be.
What advice can you give budding writers or authors?
I mean, I would say just do it. I never planned to write a book. I never thought I would write a book. It wasn't on my bucket list of things to do. So I think that if you enjoy writing, and part of my Create Happy manuscript is really about using things like journal writing and letter writing, whether it's to a family member or to your younger self, or to your future self, right? So I would say just write and do it for yourself and see what comes of it. And you can always organize it and rewrite it and have it edited a zillion times. But I would say just do it. I think people are afraid to just start.
Definitely, there's so many books out there, and it's overwhelming. And what publisher, what agent? Do you use an agent? Did you use an agent?
I didn't. I had queried for agents for over a year. That book was rejected 100 times, about 100 times. And the last rejection that I got before I self-published, I don't know, it was like just sort of meant to be. So I get, one more rejection. You start getting good at being rejected. And she opened the email with, "Your writing is beautiful." And that she obviously rejected the book, but that's how she opened the email. And for whatever reason on that day, at that moment, I was like, someone else who's trained thought enough of my writing to write that sentence in an email. I was like, I'm done, I'm going to self-publish it. So that's sort of how that came.
Okay, very interesting. How many times, or I guess the real question I'm interested in, how important is editing?
Oh my goodness. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And even though I had a lot of writing experience, it's a different kind of editing for fiction. And this time, with another fiction manuscript, I will know better, and I will send to 3 beta readers first that I trust and respect, and then I will send it out to be professionally edited. And then when it comes back, I will check it with a fine-tooth comb, because even the editor misses things. It is something that I feel like I still haven't even mastered yet. I'm learning as I go. It is rough. And you have to be able to see that red ink all over your own words.
And be used to, or you have to have the tough skin.
You do. And the only thing that I think helped me was when I defended my doctoral dissertation. There's nothing like a panel of people that sit in front of you, only there to rip your work apart. So I think that was good training. Yes. I was like, oh, they can't hurt me. It was that experience probably helped.
I have to admit, I've had the similar experiences with my doctoral, and it was brutal, the orals.
And
even the dissertation, going back and revising parts of the writing, yes.
Or even when you first start in that kind of program, and you have been told your whole life you're a decent writer, and you believe you're a decent writer, and those first few papers you turn in, and they're awful, awful. And you're like, am I cut out for this? You go home crying, the whole thing. So it does toughen you up a little bit, and it has helped. But I managed the editing process for this book very poorly, so I hope to improve the second time.
I'm trying to think. I think those are most of the questions that I had. Is there anything you would like to share with our audience, including your real name?
Yes, sure. So my real name is Dr. Dawn Matera, and Create Happy, which is the manuscript I'm pitching right now, is written under that name because it has more of a research tone to it about the psychology of happiness and how our thoughts create our own reality and how you can manifest a move to Maine if that's what your heart desires, right? And so I will continue to write nonfiction under my real name, and Didi Cooper is a fun pen name.
It's a good pen name.
When I came up with the pen name, well, the reason for it was because I did want to detach myself from my profession. I needed a break, and it was like that whole, I want to be in the witness protection program. I want to change my identity completely, which is silly. But Didi is what my grandson calls me. And Cooper is the name of my dog. So,
Perfect. So that's how you came
so
up.
it's very close to my heart.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else we can share?
I don't think so. Locally, the book is sold at Fine Print, at Day Trip. It's sold at Bradbury's in Cape Porpoise.
And also, just for the audience, they're all autographed copies. So definitely,
Yes.
This is the time to pick up an autographed copy. And I really recommend that you add it to your book club read.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Didi.
Yes,
Can I call you Didi?
Absolutely. You can pretty much call me anything, but yes, everyone calls me Didi.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Oh, thank you. And it's been a delight. And once again, we'd like to thank the Church on the Cape and
Yes.
Mike Kelly. And I think we'll call it a day.
Thank you so much.